tenanted or vacant, in a good state of repair. I guess as a seller, the aim is to give the buyer as few friction points as possible. So anything that a buyer is going to immediately see that they think is going to cost money, cause hassle, require repair, dealing with that up front before presenting for sale, can be a mechanism to increase bids. Because I don't know if you would agree, Danny, I guess any of these points are things that bidders are going to think, well, actually, I've got this, and this to account for, therefore I'll reduce my bids accordingly. And if we can get rid of those points, it allows people to bid to the maximum.
Yeah, and I think especially in the current market we're in, I think buyers are being a lot more, what would be the word? Trying to think what the word I'm trying to...
They're certainly more cautious, aren't they?
Yeah, cautious. We'll go with cautious. They're more cautious of buying properties at the moment because of the state of everything. So if they've got an excuse to be able to knock down the price, they're certainly going to take it. So by preventing that, I definitely agree with you that it gives them less.
In many ways, it's a buyer's market, isn't it?
100% at the moment, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the points I've got here are, I guess it's trying to make the property you're presenting as slick and smooth and trouble-free as possible for the potential buyers. Because actually, if you present something that isn't quite right, isn't optimal, or has problems, in a buyer's market, that buyer will just move to the next transaction that is presented properly. So yes, and I think in fairness, this is quite high level in this event, and I know myself. There's David who works alongside me in the team, or your team at Patterson's, Danny. We could talk about that with individual properties, couldn't we? Before they're presented and how they're presented. So it's really high level at this point, but I think it's a conversation by property in effect. What's worth doing, to what extent to get it positioned to best effect.
And basically, what is the seller hoping to achieve from that? Because they might just want rid of it straight away. So in that case, are they willing to sort of lower their expectations a little bit to compromise for the quicker sale? So I
guess that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because there might be some sellers who think, we know this property has these problems, but we don't want the time or stress or to fix
we don't have the money, maybe. Yeah, we just maybe don't have the money to solve it. There's them sort of situations as well.
Yeah, no, that is a good point, because I think you're right. For some sellers, convenience is what they're seeking, isn't it? So if they have maybe, I'll come on to this next, but a tenancy that has problems or a property that has physical problems, I guess you're right. There are sellers for whom their aspiration is just to offload. So actually, it's a fair point. Actually, some people might not want to fix the issue. They might want to pass it on to a buyer who's prepared. Yeah.
As long as they're aware that that's going to be a buyer's negotiation points, that's probably the key as well as there. So it's just being aware of them is just as important as sorting them, I think. Yeah,
no, that's a really good point, actually. And you're right, it is much about seller convenience as buyers, isn't it? No, that's a really interesting point. I have a whole, I guess, being a letting agent in the main, this is slightly a bugbear, and we have whole webinars on this stuff that we could direct people to. How many hours did it go on for, Lewis? It was many hours one evening. Very late when we got to the office, when we did a sort of tenancy compliance webinar that we will rerun in a shorter format.
It was about nearly 10 o'clock by the time I was home.
It was quite late. So I am going to keep it high level on this one, but certainly for sellers, I think, who are presenting a property for sale with tenants, I think personally it is absolutely imperative to not give any landlord buyer any doubt or concern about the quality of paperwork and how the tenancy has been initiated. In the main, these things are dealt with when the tenancy is commenced. This is my letting agent's life all week, talking to landlords about tenancies they've got somewhere else, been initiated by someone else, and are they correct? And I've just listed some of the things there, but a key one is ensuring the bond has been correctly dealt with, because, do Pattersons want to be, does any selling agent want to be dealing with a dispute over a bond on a tenancy that was X years ago that hasn't been dealt with correctly? it puts roadblocks in the way of a sale. I think. Would you agree, Danny? They're just not helpful hurdles, shall we say?
No. Yes, ones that are should be easily resolved. Should be done up front just to make it smoother. I think you're right, especially if a landlord is buying something and there is problems with the paperwork. They'll then start worrying about, well, is there been problems with the tenancy? Should I be buying this? And it just puts questions in their head that it doesn't need to be.
Yeah,
just absolutely. From having, like you said, that paperwork.
Yeah. So what we encourage sellers to do is either, if they're not with us or sort of have an agent who's sort of working on their behalf, is in effect to have a tenancy audit, which is something that we offer. And in that, this isn't an exclusive list, but we're looking at, was the gas cert issued correctly, the electric cert, the EPC, the how to rent guides, if there's licenses for the property. This is why this was a whole 3 hours, but these are all things that should have been accounted for correctly at the outset, but sadly in a lot of cases haven't. And then, of course, a transacting solicitor may well pick these up, and then all of a sudden you've got an unnecessary delay or a negotiation point. So we try and deal with that up front. Yeah,
just to interrupt you there, sorry. And if you're missing one of these items, by the way, from a sale when you've got a tenant in situ and you haven't supplied one of these in the legal pack, that is a cause for the buyer to be able to pull out legally, which means the deal does fall through.
Right.
So it just gives that, again, it gives that buyer an option to be right, well, you haven't supplied all the right information, so therefore I haven't made a conscious decision to buy this property, informative decision, because there's been lacking information. So it's imperative that these kind of things are included, especially in an auction sale, 100%.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. So as I say, we would encourage, certainly we do a tenancy audit service in the letting agents, and I'm sure other agents would offer something similar, but it's just this audit of, if you're bringing a property forward for sale that has a tenant, making sure that, I'd suggest before the sales agent is engaged, let's make sure the tenancy is absolutely correct, completely compliant, and then removing that doubt from buyers, if that makes sense. I guess what has value to a buyer, in my opinion, is a solid tenancy with a good tenant who's paying a fair rent and the paperwork correctly, compliantly in place. That is, to me, what a landlord buyer wants. So as a seller, I suggest,
If they're buying, for me, if someone's buying with a tenant in situ, they're wanting a ready-made business in a way. So they want to know everything is, they're not going to buy it and then all of a sudden incur loads of problems. They just want to be able to buy it and get that rent from day one. So, I 100% agree with you.
Absolutely. So I think what I would say, if anyone is sat with a tenant of property, they're thinking of selling and maybe has concerns over some of these elements, most, if not all, can be fixed with issue of a new tenancy pack. There's ways and means. But I think certainly that's a journey to go on, probably before you move into the sales part. So you'll know, Danny, that for some clients, we've done that in 2-part, where the letting agent's been engaged in effect to tidy up, for want of a better word, to do the audit, and then it comes forward. You're quite right, so that we can say, there you go, for the legal pack, there is the suite of documents. We can demonstrate to a buyer that this tenancy is legally compliant. The sale has the best possible chance, or fewer friction points, shall we say, to get the seller the best possible price.
100% agree. And you do that. Yeah, we see that all the time. You're very thorough with your paperwork, Andrew, which we thank you for. So
I mean, it's nice to hear, but I think as landlords will know, we have no choice. The fines for not doing these things are eye-watering. We do it out of desire to be correct, but we really don't have a choice. But as you'll know, sadly, I've spoken to landlords where their agents maybe aren't as thorough, or landlords who've initiated tenancies themselves and not been aware of some of these requirements. So you do sometimes get gaps, to want of a better word. And I will mention briefly, we recently took management of a property. The gentleman rang on the morning he completed via another auction company. It wasn't Patterson's. And what transpired, there was no paperwork. He believed he had a tenant, but no tenancy agreement and no tenant contact details. We later discovered there was also no selective license, which is potentially a £30,000 fine. So that has taken quite a lot of unpicking. And that owner is suggesting to us that he may have recourse against the seller. And he may well, that's something he'll have to explore. But that is probably an example of a lesson of how not to package a tenanted property for sale.
Yeah, that is certainly an example.
Yeah.
I'd be sleepless nights if I was that buyer.
Well, we were at a position of literally having to physically visit the property to establish if there was an occupier.
Right.
And then quickly initiating things like gas certs and other really basic statutory checks to make sure they were safe, because they may have been done, but no one could evidence it. So, I guess they're examples of, horror stories that, I guess these lessons.
Yeah, it does happen, unfortunately.
Absolutely, yeah. So certainly, I think the lesson there is if you're a seller with a tenanted property, there's absolutely ways and means. There might be a multi-step process to go through, but I think by going through it in that tenancy audit, then present for sale route, you can give yourself the best chance of a friction-free sale and not give bidders any, potential buyers any room for, people are just looking for a reason to reduce their offer, aren't they? So let's remove the reasons to reduce their offer. Therefore, we get you the best price.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another one that I have to say, David in our office, I think, has mastered this.
Good.
A big one that is often of concern to sellers is about their existing tenant and communication with them, and will the tenant just vacate? And I don't think we've had one who vacated, but I think it's genuinely just about the communication. I hear horror story after horror story of a for sale sign going up and then that being the first thing the tenant knows about a sale. And of course, they're then concerned about their home. Of course, they think they're going to have to leave. And of course, they're straight on Rightmove looking for a new house. And then the outgoing landlord, isn't it? We would all do the same.
100%.
And actually, the outgoing landlord's just lost their rent flow. And acquired a council tax bill because it's going to sit empty. So, I think this communication with the tenant, I think, is absolutely critical. We often we don't have a script as such, but we have a number of things we'll run through with the tenant. First, it's obviously keeping them informed. Critical to let them know that the property is advertised with the tenancy included.
Yes. Big thing.
So that they're aware that any buyer knows they are there and that they have rights under their tenancy. So that's something we would first be looking to explain to them. But I think the big thing that we try and pitch is, if you're a tenant of a property and this property is being presented for sale with tenants, the tenant is sort of part of the offer. And if we can demonstrate there's a reliable, sensible tenant who wants to stay, that it's an opportunity for the tenant because they meet the viewers. If they present themselves to the buyer well, they can build that new relationship. They can have a relationship with the incoming owner that they want, and they can start that new landlord-tenant relationship off in a productive manner. So I guess we're trying to say to the tenant, this is an opportunity, not something to be afraid of. Yeah. Engage with the process. Meet those buyers. Present yourself well. Maybe explain you might want some investment in this, that, or the other in future years. But for tenants to engage, there's an opportunity for them as well. And I think once it's pitched in that way, I don't think we've had one tenant who's moved out during a sales process because they get this handheld sort of communication model.
Yeah, and let's be honest, well, if someone is looking to buy a property with a tenant in, they're expecting instant rent coming in. And if that tenant then leaves and they've got to then advertise the property, go through that process, there might be a void period right at the start that they didn't want. So, I think by you doing that service enhances the buyer's satisfaction as well.
Yes.
So, I think it's a great thing to do.
It's just critical, I think. I mean, the last thing you want is just the tenant running away. But I've spoken to many potential sellers who are very reluctant to proceed to sale because they don't want to upset the apple cart with the tenant that they've got. And it can take quite a bit of reassurance. But I think done properly, I mean, I'm sure Lewis will say this when he's doing tenant references. People will probably come forward for houses and it's my landlord selling the house.
There honestly, I'd say a solid probably 80% of my applications are people saying either my landlord's not doing maintenance, me landlord isn't communicating with me, my landlord's selling the house, or anything along those lines. And a lot of the time, it's a complaint with the landlord.
Yeah.
It's not a situation of they want to move, it's just the landlord's not doing something.
Yeah. And the sales ones, they probably can stay, it's just badly communicated. So they assume they can't. So this is definitely a big tip for me about how the tenant's handled in the process. But the tenants should be part of I think if we're presenting a tenanted property for sale, the right tenant becomes an asset as well as the property, because you're right, the new landlord gets a business on day one, and if it's the right tenant, it's part of the bundle, isn't it? It's part of the reason to buy.
I think it becomes bigger than the property, to be honest. I think it's a bigger asset to have a good, reliable, strong tenant that you know's going to, say, pay on time, is going to stay there for X amount of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because that's the reason you're doing it, isn't it? To get that rental figure. So that's more important than the actual. So yeah, I think it's more important.
They are integral to the deal, aren't they? So yeah, it's something we're sort of careful of, really. And you know what? It's actually not rocket science. It's really not rocket science. But I do see it being done badly.
Me too.
Yeah, it has pretty catastrophic effects, because I suspect a tenant who's obstructive will reduce your achieved price, because they'll restrict viewings, they'll present themselves badly, they'll probably speak ill of the former landlord, all these things, but it will just drag the bids down, because potential buyers are going to be put off. So we want to flip that on its head.
Yeah, but again, this is why I'll give you a bit of credit here, Andrew, actually. But this is, because you've got such a strong lettings background, that's the form, like the front of your mind is the letting side. So you're conscious of all those things, and you do actually make sure it's done. Whereas some agents that are just purely sales don't have the same mindset. So I think where you're coming from is a much better place for landlords to look to sell than just a sales agent. And
well, thank you. Well, yeah, I'll pass that on, because I will say the team do the hard work for us. The model is there, but I want it, because there are others who deliver it, but it is important, because to be fair, the last thing we want is to push the tenant out. It just makes no sense.
For no one, no person in that transaction at all is benefiting if the tenant isn't there.
Not at all. No. So that's a big one. And then this has become more and more prevalent over the last few years about ensuring